Hello, hello.
Yes. We'll have you start this whole thing.
All right. Thank you.
And can you welcome all the guests?
Sure. Welcome. Hi, everyone. I'm Juana Sullivan Jansen, an MFA student here in the Department of Art. And on behalf of the department and Rotem, the coordinator for the Visiting Artist Program, I want to welcome you to Bobby Rogers' Artist Talk. Bobby is a multidisciplinary artist, visual historian, and culturalist who is the founder and creative director of The Bureau, a media and design studio that utilizes photography, film, design, fashion, research, dialogue, exhibitions, and creative experiences to weave the thread of our collective histories. After graduating from MCAD in 2014, Rogers dove into multidisciplinary creation, self-studying photography while simultaneously working as a design supervisor for Juxtaposition Arts and the design manager for CRS Architecture and Design. In 2018, he was named the official photographer for the Walker Art Center and subsequently became the first senior art director of African American style at Target Creative. Rogers' uniquely investigative degree approach to visual storytelling allows for a distinctive form of creative problem solving that merges a refined visual aesthetic with the voices and perspectives of those who have historically been silenced and dismissed. He has amassed an extraordinary list of clientele, including the New York Times, Apple, Paper Magazine, Periscope, and Vox Media. He has premiered work widely, including the Minnesota Museum of American Art, the International Center of Photography, Public Functionary, and most recently premiering The Innocence of Faith at the University of St. Thomas Gallery, an extraordinarily beautiful photographic portrait project exploring Minnesota's community of people who live at the intersection of being Black and Muslim. It is my pleasure to introduce you to visiting artist Bobby Rogers.
Well, thank you for that. I'm gonna have to have you send me that. Thank you all for inviting me here to speak on my work. I feel like I've had like a long history with U of M. I think in 8th grade, I joined a PSEO program, basically through the university, where they came to our schools from 8th grade through 12th grade and gave a lot of students from more like underprivileged backgrounds proper like post-secondary education, and then we'd be at the university 6 weeks throughout the summer, every one of those years, taking classes and studying and things like that. So I really have a special place for you, as well as doing the Humphrey Fellowship and completing that last year. It's really cool to be here now as a lecturer. So thank you for having me. So I'm gonna get right into it. My name is Bobby. Here's a picture of me when I was maybe 5. This is probably the youngest photo I have of myself. At this time, I was studying at a Montessori school. From kindergarten through 4th grade, my mom put us in Montessori schools, which were a school system that's like characterized as a method of education for children that seek to develop natural interests and activities rather than using like the formal methods of teaching. And so a lot of that back then felt really autonomous. It was very much like we were in this environment where we were really influenced to take initiative on subject matter at our own pace, etc. And so, you know, even the first time leaving that structure in 4th grade and going to like a real school, I just didn't understand how we were all just like sitting there quiet all day. listening to someone speak and then getting tasked, and I just couldn't translate. I remember when I got to college and studying at MCAD, this sort of like wonderment that I felt for that style of education. In current art schools right now are sort of like based off of that style of education, and that was founded by the Bauhaus, maybe I think in the early 1930s. The Bauhaus sort of revolutionized the way we think about art education, changing from this sort of, learning from old masters and studying their work and replicating that towards this praxis that centers learning technical skills throughout different art practices, and then going deeply into subject matter once you figure out what you like after knowing like the basis of everything. That method of Montessori teaching, to me, I felt was my first sort of possibly like hand in creativity without me knowing, that way of just like using my own mind to create things. And, my mom, this is my mom and my dad, by the way. They met in Minneapolis back in the day. My dad came from Chicago. My mom's from Nebraska. The stories I hear about them at this age is that my dad was like this prolific, like hustler, and then my mom was his muscle. And if you met them, you'd see what I'm talking about. My dad's very calm demeanor, very, he thinks a lot before he speaks, things like that. And my mom is very protective, very protective. And so my mom was really probably like the first artist that I ever knew. Honestly, I remember being the age that I was in the photo previously, and very vividly seeing pieces of art that she created. I think it was a painting of a dog and a painting of a fruit bowl. Seeing both of those and just being shook by just like not understanding how you can create something that didn't exist in the human mind and then putting it out there. And I knew quickly after that, being blown away by that experience. I also felt a similar sort of like amazement at the human mind at that age when my sister brought back her 4th grade homework. and I was like, the human mind so vast. I'm in kindergarten, and I'm like, 4th grade, I don't know if I can do that. But I knew at that time that I was really, I had like a explorative sort of mindset about everything, and knowing that you can be able to do that, having that experience, and seeing my mom whenever that she'd influence us and like instill certain principles and disciplines within us. That was sort of me. That was really, I didn't know until later in life, the foundation that she was building for a lot of us, but for me and my siblings. So something that used to happen a lot, when we were kids, my mom would have us sporadically like stand up just at random times and just like say to us like, you are a leader, you are a soldier. And she'd have us repeat that back to her. And it would be really like very intense until she believed it from us. And we had to just repeat that. And I just remember that always happening throughout our life. And that was something that I didn't realize is like her methods of, instilling any type of structure with us. She was from the South. She was the youngest of, I can't remember if it was 6 or 8 siblings. And she bore the brunt of like most of any like trauma that was like inflicted on any of her siblings. And so her methods, though, like I understand what she was trying to do, weren't always, best for a child development, but to her, she had to be that way. Cause I think about the pain that she endured and the pain that she had to go through. She left home when she was 14 years old, and moved to Minneapolis. And so what you had to go through at that age to get to that point, I understand what she was trying to do. And in those moments of being like, you are a leader, you're not a follower, you are a soldier. I can see that she was scared. And as someone who never was, taught to deal with trauma, but has to deal with so many wars at that time. The 80s, there was like the war on drugs, there's the war on poverty, there's the war on crime. They're dealing with all of that with little to no help from the government, while also trying to raise kids in these environments. We grew up on 33rd in Chicago, which was, 5 blocks down from where George Floyd was murdered. And so in that environment, she had to take a sort of very intense approach to counter what was out there also trying to entice us. This is a picture of my mom, my older brother. She had my older brother when she was 15. And she had my brother before she met my dad. But the way that my brother grew up, and seeing that, they in this photo, you wouldn't know if they were the same age or not. Like you can see that she grew up, she was like a child raising a child, and she was placed in this predicament of raising like young Black men and women in a really like precarious time. And she was really just trying to, prepare us for the world. Yeah, I think, with so that was my older brother. I do a lot of work just sort of thinking about how like our identities show up in these environments, but more so how the nuances of very specific cultural insight, cultural mannerisms and things, cultural subgroups. I do a lot of work on understanding the parts of those intersections that aren't often talked about out loud, and even thinking about groups that my brother might represent. We hear about them from a very specific point of view often, yet we never hear the stories that go into how a person got in those environments and how a person are shaped by the environments they're in. But I see that my brother absorbed he's the one that tells me a lot of stories about my mom and dad growing up, because he grew up sort of, my dad adopted my brother when him and my mom met. And so he in the time of their like quote unquote heyday, he has a lot of stories about like, absorbing like this hustle attitude, like their mentality, like the principles, and most importantly, the aspects of like survival at that time and at that stage. But as I got older, I started to see how these intense lessons of leadership would begin to manifest differently, just like within myself, within my siblings, as we've seen within my brother, within my younger sister. And I now know that our mom was really trying to build young men and women of principle, of discipline, because she knows how powerful the world can be at disappearing these same young men and women. And even if she battles her vices every single day, she was trying to make sure that we didn't have to battle those same vices growing up. So this was a photo of my senior show at MCAD. I graduated in 2014. At this time, a lot of people don't know that I studied illustration, and my primary form of art was just like really hyper realistic, like fashion illustrations. At the time, I thought like I had it figured out. I was going to be a fashion illustrator. I did this like senior presentation with like these life-size illustrations. Over here, you see like 2 fashion magazines that like I created. There were some things on the floor too that were like newspaper, like marketing pamphlets and things. And so I thought I knew what I was going to be doing in life. Like I was like, I'm about to be the coldest fashion illustrator out here. I don't even know yet. And I think I took some sort of comfort in knowing that like I think I know what I want to do, and I think that probably already puts me a little bit ahead if I can just keep leaning into that and keep exploring that. But I think a really pivotal moment is that right after our senior show, my laptop with all my work on it died and just completely crashed. And I was broke because I had to put this together. And so there was a moment in life that I think, and I didn't know that, after school, you just have so much free time. You can really fill it up with whatever you want. And I knew that when I was in school, I wished that I had more time to just look at and study subject matter outside of like my illustration discipline. But at the time, there's a hyper focus on you doing like a very specific medium and zoning into that and becoming the best at that. But several things that happened after graduating and then my laptop crashing is that right before that happened, I obtained all three of these books from friends. And in that period, while I was waiting to get raise enough money to get a new laptop, while, Mike Brown just got murdered in St. Louis, I think I was at this sort of like precipice of understanding like who I was more. And it's like, I think I got the Malcolm X books and the Barack Obama book a lot earlier, and I read pieces of them, but I never took it fully in just because, when you're studying art, as a lot of us know, it's a full-time practice. But when I did have so much free time to then fill in what I would normally have classes for, and then not having a laptop at all and just having like books, honestly, I had a bike and some books. And so I was like biking around, like maybe listening to music on the phone or at the crib reading or like outside somewhere reading. And I think because of what the country was going through at that time and what we're going through as Black people, everything that I absorbed through these texts completely transformed my my psychology, my approach to my work. It sort of gave me a purpose that I thought I was looking for. And I only say thought because part of me thought that I had it figured out, but I knew that part of that sort of wanting to be an illustrator wasn't as fulfilling to me as being able to just create more vastly. Something with illustration is that it just takes a long time. When you first start to like create, especially when you're responding to movements and things happening, I was doing realistic illustrations take you, 40 accumulative hours to like complete. So you're really creating something. And then by the time you're done, the world moves so quickly, so they're on to something else. But I think at this time, I realized, when I was in school, I studied illustration, but I also studied business whenever I could, and I studied design whenever I could. And so at this time, I think after reading these texts, coming across them, learning like Obama's story, not so much him, the president, this was him becoming into his presidency, but me more so learning about how he got to that point. I realized that, autobiographies for me were a very specific method of learning the keys to or methods to success because they lay them out very simply for you. And if like Obama's story, he wasn't planning to be a president. There are a lot of wild shit that happened when he was president and a lot of things I don't agree with. But the reason this came into my hands because one of my best friends in high school, his entire dream in high school was to work for Obama. And he went to GW, studied politics, and graduated and got a job in his administration. And so he ended up giving me a signed copy of the book and was like, read this. And then the Quran, which I came across after reading Malcolm X's book more fully and just studying. And in any of these texts, you have this reservoir of information that can last you. You can study it for as long as you want, for little as you want. But I do think that somehow that equation of coming across all three of these at the same time, which very much gave me different avenues into my identity as a Black man in this world, combined with my interest in design and just multidisciplinary creation, which I didn't know what to title it at that time, all then led me to sort of bring all those complex thoughts slowly together. And so the first thing I did after getting my laptop back, figuring out a way to rent a camera from a friend to just study photography a bit more, because I think as I was consuming this, I started to go out and just photograph the movement. I was like, all right, if the illustrations will take too long, I can do some design work, but more so I can just go out and photograph. I knew how to use the camera just at a rudimentary level, just because I use a lot of photography as references. So I take a lot of photos of people when I'm working on projects. And so the first thing that I created right after all of that exploration was this project. The image isn't as detailed up here, but there was a song I heard at the time released by this independent artist called Ghost. And it had this very ephemeral vibe to it. But I felt like it was and this time SoundCloud was popping off. And it had a very Black ambient vibe to the sound. And I think that inspired me as a person who's inspired by emotion and using art as a form of trying to translate emotion. I was like, how would I translate this song that impacts me so deeply through an image? And maybe that could be a way that I can just start studying and experimenting and figuring out who I am as an artist now in other mediums. after doing that project, I wanted to see if there was a way for me to sort of like mix these mediums together. And I got a chance to be in this group show. And so I created these two pieces that were supposed to be a diptych in this show. And one was called Soul of Adam, one was called Spirit of Eve. And it was more so me trying to figure out how do I bring like my like spiritual thinking, like with my artistic thinking, with like my historical thinking, and like create art again in these spaces like illustration and photography. You know, if in school we're studying it, and you almost think about them as like completely separate mediums, because at the time, you know, photography was seen as like taking jobs away from illustrators, but illustrating and doing art form that very close to just like its original form, there's almost like you have like this chip on your shoulder about like how undervalued it is. But at the time I still wanted to do both. It wasn't a complete switch. And so I started to create work where I would have one aspect in like one world and one in the other. Because, and again, this was me thinking about what does it mean to be interdisciplinary? What does it mean, like what is the multi aspect of all of that? And how can I keep these in the same world? And could you tell that they're part of the same world, even though they're these different mediums and separate mediums? And so that was my illustration. This was a preview of my illustration style. As you've seen with the fashion illustrations earlier, these were more of like realistic illustrations, like collage, multimedia, all of that. I was just trying to figure it out, honestly. And I was just making stuff, and I knew that I had a certain type of like design mind or an aesthetic mind. And so that was me just like letting go of any sort of worries that I might have about what somebody might think about the work, and sort of like bringing just all of everything and all of the knowledge I had into one piece. And then this was me being really minimal with this photo. That piece took me maybe like 40 some hours to complete. And I completed, and this was maybe like the 6th shot into setting this up. And so it was a really interesting like way of going about a project. And just like I learned a lot, just like about the time, space, continuum and shit like that. Because I'm just like, wait, how, like the value that I'm placing on this. And I'm trying to, I think when I started photography, a lot of that was me trying to see like this, I got this done really quickly. Why do I not feel the same? Or why do I do feel fulfilled? Why do I feel both of those like in tandem? And it's because I'm so used to like art that I felt being like really amazing, taking so long. And what I realized is that as an illustrator, you spend so much time in your mind sort of compiling things that don't exist and like putting things together that really, you know, weren't in the world before. And so you do that for so many years, and you do that so specifically. And, you know, when I'm creating this piece, I kind of knew what I wanted it to look like. I just had to get the elements. And, you know, 80% of that process was me like feeling like nerve wracked. And then like the first 10 and the last 10 are like, yeah, exactly, that's what it's supposed to be. But I feel like switching these mediums kind of gave me a very like working on them together, and then being able to switch through back and forth gave me a very clear direction on like how I can start moving into this world. So, you know, I realized something that has to do, when we think about photography, I didn't think about the collaborative aspect of it as much. When you're in illustration and design, when you're in illustration or you're doing design, a lot of that time is spent alone. I mean, there are, you know, as an art director now, when I'm working on projects for Target, we have like 15, 20 people on the team. When we're doing projects like this, it's me and everyone in the photo. that's the team for it. And so having projects like this at that time, then leaving from Spirit of Eve and Soul of Adam, using my off time to like photograph these movements, while also trying to explore this more very like stylized artistic direction into just like our experiences at the time as like young Black adults, especially like in Minnesota. I think we were trying to figure out how to create work, not on a local level, which I think a lot of people in Minneapolis and a lot of the art world just like here is very local centric. We knew that we were inspired so heavily through school and even after by like the global art diaspora. And so we started to just come together as people like within the community we all like found each other on Instagram and just connected and sat at a coffee shop one day and put like an idea together and shot that. And that was both this sort of like foray into like creating with others, collaboration, taking things like taking art direction out of a studio and putting that into an environment, because I think in my mind that was still separate at the time. And then knowing that we can create on a global level, we can create in ways that talk to who we are, that aren't sort of compromising on our morals or our aesthetics. And it's unique. And at that time, we just wanted to, you know, be individual and like create cool shit. So it was a really beautiful time for collaboration. And it helped me understand like who I was even more than, you know, and how I can fit into this art world as a photographer. And this was also like the foray, like taking the toe a little bit into art direction, not knowing what that is, and relinquishing some creative control. You know, the first time that, you know, after doing those projects, I think that was 2016. This is going into 2017. And towards the beginning of 2017, I ended up having this idea to shoot this project based off of this hashtag that was going viral on Twitter called Being Black and Muslim. The hashtag was basically chronicling different experiences of Black Muslim individuals. And I can't remember what the subtext was for the hashtag going viral, but I knew that once I was I seen it and was reading the stories, I realized that, yeah, unless you are like a Black Muslim individual, you don't really know any like other Black Muslim, you don't know other Black Muslims, but you don't even understand the idea of like what Islam is through a Black perspective, even though, you know, if you're the largest group of American Muslims, it's a very type of erasure to still never be asked to speak on, you know, the subject of Islam or go to panels or go to lectures or et cetera, and see that, you know, that identity is not sort of represented at all. And so I thought it'd be really dope to just like bring some friends together really casually. We shot these portraits in my living room. I set like a photo backdrop up. We had a light, people came over, like we took a bunch of photos, like chilled, ate. And maybe like a month or two later, I decided to just post them on Twitter. Not thinking anything of it, just like, oh, I have these photos, I forgot to post these. Like, I'm thinking too much about it, I'm just gonna get them out. And I think that was the first real like shift in recognition within the work that like happened on a global scale. And I think pretty quickly, like within the hour, I was contacted by like Huffington Post and like Elle and all these other magazines to write about this series, just because I think the inclination that we had of, you know, you can probably see this hashtag and be like, oh, okay, Black people, okay, Muslim people, I think of them separately, which a lot of people in places do. Once you're able to see these portraits and understand the identities and read the stories and testimonials that come with each portrait, I think that was something new, especially at the moment in the Black art space, because I think when we're coming into these spaces, a lot of people don't want you to focus on subject matter that's sort of what they would consider like causes tension. So you know, a lot of us came into these spaces doing fashion stuff, doing random art, experimental design projects. But I knew that I still wanted to add some element to the work that was more than just like the temporary, like visual, like gratification that I got from it. Like I wanted it to actually do something and speak about something. And this project did that, and it sort of like confirmed with the recognition that I received that we were moving into a certain in a certain direction. And you know, from this point forward, I might say we a lot, just because a lot of my work from this point forward just involves a lot of people. And so I never look at it as like me doing this. I see it as like the team. And so and we still do a lot of work together, and we're meeting weekly still years later. So I always say we when I speak about like the work that I'm doing. You know, after being Black and Muslim, we started to figure out like how to touch on more and more subject matter. This was just like a really quick like experimental project that was supposed to be, it's called Don't Touch My Crown. It was supposed to be a part of this larger collection of work that I was creating for a show that was coming up later that year. And equally, this work got a little bit of traction because, you know, Don't Touch My Crown, Solange came out with an album earlier that year. So we were like thinking about how to tap into the zeitgeist a little bit and get eyes on it. And that was a lot of that work then, you know, from being Black and Muslim on through this sort of 2017 period. I was creating a lot of work that for myself, I thought would be accumulated in this larger solo show that I was preparing for. And so you'll see a lot of these images, which I used to just post at the time, because there was a moment where I realized, these photos are really beautiful individually. They'll have their own history to them. They all touch on really deep subject matter. For example, this being titled Catch a Fade, which was about the influence of Black barbershops like on the culture. Both of these portraits actually right now are on view at the Minnesota Historical Society, I believe, in a show that's up until December. So you can go check those out. But what really happened is that I created this first picture here, and the blue one on the left. And I think the day after I created that image and I looked at it, I realized that I'm gonna let all these other pieces live on their own as artwork, and I'll just start posting those, because that's gonna then make me have to create new work. And I really wanted to study this subject matter. I think this was the perfect sort of combination of like my interest in design, my interest in futurism, my interest in photography, my interest in fashion, my interest in like culturally influenced art. I think these were then the foundation, and I went to create a full solo show, or my first solo show, 2017, called The Black or the Berry, which was an accumulation of all of that work of studying now that medium in that context. And I just felt like at this moment, the work that came before it didn't really always mark all the tickers that I wanted them to, whereas this did that completely and in multiple ways. And I hate sort of, repetition myself as an artist. Like I can't make patterns, I hate like doing same motions, which is also, part of being an illustrator. You gotta do the same shit a lot. And I realized I didn't like that. And that wasn't something that I was like keen on doing forever. And so The Black or the Berry was a way, first into now like realizing this aesthetic, but and then at the show, we were thinking about accessibility, because I think within art, it's something that, is almost like an afterthought, whether it be accessibility in terms of ramps and entrances, or accessibility in terms of like, we go to art shows and you see pieces like this, they're all probably thousands of dollars or whatever. And we know that our audience aren't people that have thousands of dollars to pay for art. And so this was the first time as well that showing us that when we're gonna do an art project, we're gonna make products and the artwork just accessible at every level as much as we can. And so with The Black or the Berry, we had these final pieces. We had prints that were available, but we also created shirts that said The Black or the Berry on them. That were really, I think they were like 30 some dollars at the time. And we're just like, and it wasn't that we were creating any of this to get money from it. We were just creating it to start creating the environment and the foundation within the community that we wanted, that we felt could exist in Minneapolis. What was really cool about this exhibit and just that foray into like clothing and fashion is that those hoodies that we created for this, I think we maybe had like 50 or so of them available that night. They all sold out in like 30 minutes. So we had like just a presentation a month or so into the show, and I bought more, and those all sold out then. And so that showed us like, oh wait, shit, we might have some here with some fashion shit. Like we might have to figure out what we can do with that. And so what happened, stemming off of The Black or the Berry, and what then happens with the majority of our work is that we created a bridge now into this new aesthetic, which was going from this very visual photographic space into this tangible, real, like fashion space, but not fashion in the sense of like, I'm just gonna throw something on and wear it. We still are artists creating fashion. And so the art comes in the storytelling. The fashion is just the thing that we put out because now we told that story and we want other people to experience it and have a piece of it. And so we created an entire campaign now around these shirts. I'm wondering, is our audio connected to the laptop or no, through the Thunderbolt or no? Actually, let me not show y'all that yet. Go back really quick. I'm wondering, let's see. I might have to. So it might be coming from my laptop and not the I'm gonna hop out of presentation mode real quick. Hopefully it doesn't give anything away. Excellent. I got it now, I think. All right, computer, go back in here. All right, hopefully the audio works for us here.
Preferences, you have to select HDMI.
Oh, bet. Let's do that. Gotcha. If it doesn't work, it's all good. I could I could play from my laptop too. I'm gonna go back in here. I'll let it play, and if it doesn't, it's all good. But this was our first foray into like creating art around fashion and then fashion around art. And really, I think we did a lot of this because we just wanted a reason to make something. So I think that work was the way we were able to, really translate the emotional impact of what the work meant to us and then sort of like turn that around and put it outward so successfully, or what I thought was so successfully, is what really inspired us to sort of build the structure around it. And that's really where we then came together and started the Bureau. And that's how the Bureau was born. And it was really, I see it now, and how we seen it then is like, we're gonna be a multidisciplinary platform. We can say studio, we can say art and design, whatever, but we look at it as a platform to, talk about the stuff that we care about, talk about the things that have influenced our lives, our experiences, but also, through art as this sort of expression of love, we realize that we're able to provide these avenues to use art to sort of like bring us, ourselves, and our people to some form of freedom. And I don't know if that's like, we're the ones here that are supposed to be a part of that road to help people get over there. I don't know if we're supposed to be here to like translate or to make whatever visible. I don't know if we're supposed to like be at the end, like calling shit out, like while we're on the way. I don't know, but we know that we're really gifted using in photography. We know that we love film. We know that we understand design and fashion a certain way. We know that research and like conversations and dialogue have always been a part of our like practice, just getting to this point. And so we know that, and through all of that, we knew that we had these very specific tools, as you mentioned early in the intro, to like weave those like collective histories in a really successful and beautiful way. And within all of that, collaboration is really, really essential. And when you're moving from an individual artistic journey into a more like collaborative one, you're always thinking about, there's a certain ownership you have of the work. There's a certain, there's some people I just can't collaborate with. We're like best friends, but like they have such a deep ownership over like them physically like creating something. And that's just how they see art, which is cool. And I used to have that very specifically too. But now I know, when we're shooting projects, I don't always have to be the photographer, because I know that I need to be like the creative director. And I know that I also need to provide those opportunities and experiences for other people to build up their portfolios. Because, being in even a structure like agencies like Target or whoever, you're working with Periscope or whoever, I understand what they look for and what they're trying to bring into their atmosphere and what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with. We're creating projects, and a lot of times when I'm thinking about who to bring into them, I know a lot of really gifted artists, and I know what clients like that are looking for if they're ever looking to work with them. And so I'm usually bringing people in at very specific moments to sort of help build a part of a project that I probably at some point would be like, no, I got to shoot that. I got to be the one to execute or whatever. And I'm like, hey, I need you to do this thing. I know you need like product photos, for example, as a thing in your portfolio. Well, we have this like dope merch that we're doing these amazing shoots with, and we need someone to be there also getting the product shots. But more than you shooting that, come to the shoot to get the experience. And you have some stuff to add to your portfolio, do whatever with it. I don't have that sort of like attachment to where I feel like I need to like babysit the work at all. So I think our main goal, and I think a lot of my main goal with my work is like highlighting human potential. And through the Bureau, that's what we're always striving for. And when we're highlighting human potential and we're striving for all of this, you have to think about how like love and community are a part of, in love and dialogue are a part of an artistic practice, how art, that is art itself, bringing people into space. You have to think about how multidisciplinary creation and how art sort of speaks across screens, across discipline, how art shows itself and through word, through visual, through art, through anything. I think anything we look at, I could take a picture right now of like this part of the room, and I'm sure at some point in the next 5 years, I can figure out a way to use that in a composition later on, because we're always looking to our archives and our own resources and how to bring things out in the future. So we're creating things like that, even, so many elements of from the ground up, we're thinking about how to bring our sort of like lens into this world that isn't destructive, that's more sustainable. So we're creating this fashion, our messaging is very specific. On the back of that hoodie, it's like discover the Black and beautiful you, and it's bold. And it's letting people, and it's messaging that's very specific to the audience. We're not worried about mass producing anything. We're more so worried about like, how can we sort of influence and incite the largest change, whether it's in one's own self-belief, one's own like judgment of self or whatever, within as many like oppressed and affected communities as possible. And I realized that, now we're in a very like culture shifting moment. And that's why we decide to use multidisciplinary approach to creation. We're thinking about design and media being that sort of thing that comes together like as communication. We're moving into this sort of like third industrial revolution where, communication and, communication technologies will continue to be a significant pillar within this new world that we're building up. I think true history is told through art. I think, artists and designers, practitioners, we have so much more power than we know over this domain, over shaping the world, over influencing the world. And I think there's a part of that that's not told to us. And there's a part of that that's sort of like undercut on purpose. And I feel like, creativity is one of the greatest gifts that we could have ever received. Like being a creative individual, being able to literally bring something into the world that doesn't exist is a gift. And I do think that the work that we all do, the work we're doing with the Bureau, has the larger purpose, again, is honestly making the world a better place. But I think that there's over the next several years, we all have a hand in sort of like preserving the world that we're in right now, making it a better place. I don't know, preserving our democracy, preserving human potential, whatever. Like, there's forces that are using design, media, and communication very successfully to like skirt all of that shit. And there's forces out there that are I think what happens is that like evilness, like, I don't know, inspires people in a wild ass way. And I think what we all do as creatives moving over the next like 5-10 years is going to be really important on influencing the trajectory of this country over the next several decades. I think this is really important. Whatever you plant in your subconscious mind and nourish with repetition and emotion will one day become your reality. And I think it's really important and pertinent right now for us to really think about ways that we can sort of like nourish our subconscious minds and figure out our purpose, figure out our passions, and think about how we can like align them with, again, like making the world a better place. I really think that as artists, like we possibly have a duty in times like this to not sort of keep this like disengaging and separating like culture and politics and things like that. That like we have to summing it up. I realize we're probably like really short on time, so I'll speed it up. So here, like, Year of the Tiger was my most recent project in doing all of that. And sort of like talking about this subject matter of like waking up, but also using this time to sort of galvanize our energy, to sort of prepare ourselves for what's coming ahead, but also getting that messaging and that sort of viewpoint that is often not talked about because people, I think, just don't know how to talk about it, don't know how to bring it in a very like visual or visceral way. We bring a lot of that together. And again, we created Year of the Tiger to sort of just like get people galvanized.
Brutal and vicious and most ruthless champion there's never been. There's no one can stop me. I'm the best ever. There's never been anybody else. Listen, I'm Jack Dipsy. There's no one like I'm from the airport. There's no one that can match me. My style is impetuous. My defense is impregnable. And I'm just ferocious. I want your heart. I want to eat your children. Praise be to Allah.
Thank you.
I think we have a couple of minutes for questions.
Already. Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't realize, I didn't know, I thought honestly it was going to go like 30 minutes. So my bad.
It was fascinating. Thank you very much.
For sure.
I wanted to kind of like just open to give if there's any question here. We also have we might have also on Zoom questions. I don't know how it goes.
Oh. No, what do you think?
I'm curious about your relationship to time, how you think about time, especially in relationship to like a lot of business, like formal versus casual, and working with the people that you work with.
Yeah, there's both. Is it time and the formal casual?
Yeah.
All right, for sure. Yeah.
And like movement versus stillness.
Oh, bet. All right, for sure. You know, I think a lot of the way that I move through my work is I honestly I track a year through the projects that I'm like working on. I think after school I just stopped thinking about just literal um time in the way of like, all right, it's this month, that month, that month. I think about the work I'm doing and I kind of like plan for that time space. And I know that I can think back in history and mark areas of life based on what I was working on. When we're time in the sense of the work that we're doing, most often if we have film elements, it's because I just want to sort of provide a very quick insight into like the emotions that we're trying to get across, to sort of set that bar for people to understand where we're coming from. And then we bring them into the still photography, we bring them into the experiences. But we also look at like motion and film as a way of like capturing energy. And then hopefully we're capturing it enough that we then like sort of like deposit that to you, that and you're just amped with that energy we just gave you enough to come to our experiences or to interact with our work or whatever. Did I answer that?
Yeah, well, I'm curious, like your relationship when working with people.
Mhm.
Like some of the images, like a lot of the portraits, there's like this really profound sense of stillness.
Mhm.
Um, and how you, well, for one, how you capture that.
Yeah.
And also some of your images have a lot of like, movement, but there's like a lot of clarity. And
Mhm.
how you think about time in terms of like in anticipation of a moment.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh yeah, bet. All right. No, that makes sense. Yeah, photography is a very consuming medium, just because I think the work that we do, like it's in the fine art realm a little bit, but it's really heavily influenced by the editorial world. When you're going into those worlds, you have to figure out how to get people as comfortable as possible really quickly, especially because you're building an environment anywhere. Like I could put a shoot up together right here and like create a little world real quick. And then like the way that I usually do that with the subject is if they're here, I'll come and sit with them and just talk. We'll talk about whatever. We talk about anything. And then I'll let them know slowly as we're conversing, just like hint at things we might need to do. Um, and then I might even do things for them to let them know like it is kind of weird, but I'll do it to show you that it's okay. Because I think some of the most beautiful photos, if we're thinking about the timeless quality of those as well, are the ones that capture like a specific moment that isn't, it is me waiting in anticipation for it. And it is me like hyping up to it because I know even, the lack of conversation before a photo, like different muscles in the face aren't activated. And now I think just inherently when I take photographs or I'm working at anything, I'm thinking about all of that subconsciously. And I know that I need to build people up to a certain way. And maybe maybe a good way of saying it is like, I'm building them up enough to be able to like relax all the muscles in their face or to help relax their disposition or something. It is a part of that. And I have to be really cognizant of that and like how much time I'm taking up when I'm shooting too. Cause this is like our core team, but we have, Year of the Tiger, we have 14 people we worked with. And so we have to be very cognizant. But thank you. No, for sure.
So we have a question from Zoom that
Mhm.
I just want to put out there.
Yeah, for
because
sure.
it's a question that get asked, it's asked at pretty much every talk, so we'll get it out of the way.
For sure.
What might you say to an aspiring artist about the journey?
Shit. I say probably a few things, honestly, like pay attention to detail, manage your time, find a purpose. I think all of that happens together, honestly, when you find a purpose. And it isn't like an artistic purpose. It's really like if you find your life purpose, your art purpose will fall into that. And when you have those things really sort of zoned in, and not that it's going to always be the same throughout life, but when you have those sort of a little bit more zoned in, doing the work is a lot easier. When I knew, again, in school, we're doing the work because I just like my purpose in school was to be the best. I came into school, not like I didn't have an art education. I took like a graffiti class in 7th grade and then took like an art class like my senior year because I needed some art to apply. And so coming into that, I was like, oh shit, like now I got a purpose, which is being the best. And once I left that structure, soon after, which I thought that, it still was being the best, but the purpose then shifted to creating very specifically for these communities, and making the world honestly like a better place for all of us. And that purpose then leads me into creating this work. And so I say purpose probably will be the number one thing that I think we can all like spend this time in school, like figuring out.
Thanks for being here.
No, for sure.
So I'm really struck by tension in your work. And there are three things two questions and then one comment. The first with the tension between the individual and the collective makes me think of hip hop culture and like Big Boy and Andre being outcast, but then coming from the Dungeon family and which is this whole cast and community of people to support their ascension.
Right, exactly.
That's one tension in common. Questions. How do you manage the tension between fashion and consumables being produced, like the sweaters are being produced in other countries, like with really challenging labor conditions, and then the message being so critical and important regarding liberation? So how do you manage that tension? And then also I'm curious about the Bureau, your name coming from like the invisibility of bureaucracy.
Yeah, for sure. I might forget one of those at some point, so just let me know. Tension within the work. Yeah, it's very much so. A lot of the work when we first started off was all produced locally. Up until last year, when we just realized that we couldn't sustain just like costs locally and what goes into it. We do think a lot about how we are producing sustainably and how we're producing now when we're outsourcing and having relationships with our factories. But also when we're thinking about the impact of the clothes on the environment even, we have a structure now, which I think has become a lot more popular in the last few years, where we know that we're always going to have a base amount of X amount of orders. We know that we'll sell that. And based off of that, we then take a lot of pre-orders and we'll then order the second batch up to the amount in that pre-order so that it minimizes any sort of like extra that we have left over. Part of that, is tricky because you have to just trust that you're always going to have new ideas, which we do trust. We're always going to, like, we've surpassed that now, knowing that we can keep creating. We can create with this model because it's more sustainable for us, but we can create with this model knowing that we can tap into another part of our creativity right after we're done. And we don't have to think about, our like carbon footprint as much, even though it might still be there to some extent as it is for all of us. But what was the other question?
The Bureau.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna have to get that on tape if you saying it like that. I think the Bureau is with a lot of the work we realize that it's really intense. In the same way that we sort of like bring meanings to, we sort of like within the culture just like take terms and brings our own meanings to them all the time. We were thinking with the Bureau, how do we, where's the area where our art lives, where it's very much like political subject matter and is very intense and the aesthetic is very refined. What's a name that can give us that sort of like that combination of like emotions together as a name, even so much so as if like the name like shocks you and you want to know more, or the name's just like, wait, what's the Bureau? Or the name's like, oh, that's cool as shit, that's the Bureau. We just wanted to have something that for us felt sort of like a new take on when we were saying it ourselves and like even thought about the Bureau, but also like the word Bureau is like really charged. When we thought about what we wanted to do with it, we think that it perfectly encapsulated the work, whether it be, fashion work, whether it be like our Black forum, like community conversations, or whether it be like our work in active spaces and like collaborating with these different like Color of Change or whoever. The Bureau for us like assumes all those responsibilities. And we see it as us creating what will in the future be sort of like a powerhouse institution in this region of the country, where a lot of people over the next several years, because of global warming or wherever, will be migrating towards. And so we're building a new aesthetic right now. And the Bureau is our avenue to do that. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you
Hey.
for presenting your work.
No, for sure.
So one thing that keeps coming back for me is portraits that you showed that were part of the exhibition Black as a Berry.
beautiful, gorgeous, and the way
Thank you.
compose them, the way you photograph the drapery, it's very, for me personally, it's very sculptural.
Mhm.
And the kind of the mystery about it for me is the way the eye, you change the eyes
Yeah.
so that the iris and the pupil is in a sense obliterated. And all of the kind of cultural signification that comes with that, you know,
Mhm.
this sort of idea that the eye is the window to the soul. So
Yeah.
in a sense, the image, for me, the image comes across as more iconic
Mhm.
rather than here's a specific portrait of a specific person.
Mhm. Absolutely.
For all of these reasons, but I'm wondering if you had a very different intent with that, and I'm misreading it.
No, that was exactly it. So thank you for getting this spot on. Yeah, for us, because the series, The Black of the Berry, more largely was this collection of portraits that each one were this representation of a certain part of like Black culture to us, whether it be like the like on the right for us, that was like the Black woman as like the matriarch, whereas like the left was the Black woman as the matriarch, where the right was like us talking about the part of the culture that's very like Afrocentric and very like, you know, with the revolutionary part of the culture. And all of the portraits for us were different parts into that, whether it be Black spirituality. I think I can't remember the one in the orange. I think that had something to do with like mysticism. I haven't talked about this in a minute, so bear with me here. And just multiple things like that. The reason the eyes are whited out was because we didn't want, when you see their eyes in these portraits, we wanted you to see them as this sort of like representation of this part of the culture, as this representation of a larger subsect of like Blackness. And even when we had them in the space, there were these large like life-size portraits that we then even hung a little bit higher in the space than usual, just because we wanted it to have that sort of like grounding, respecting element. I remember someone came to an artist talk and was like, you know, when I walked in here, I felt like I couldn't cuss. And to us, we were like, and we're just like, yeah, like that's what we wanted you to come in here and feel that. And it's like us representing and talking to and with and for the community, but also for anyone who's coming into this space to also give it that same respect, whether they're Black or not. Probably a type of respect that they've never given Black people in any other space. So yeah, that's what it is.
I would want to just continue, but there is classes. So
Oh yeah, there is, my bad.
If you can help me one more time to thanks Bobby Rogers for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, thank you guys.
So really, it was really generous of you.
Oh, no, thank you.